Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. It's really special because this is our first conclave, and this sort of sets the tune for what we want to do in the space of identity management. So thank you so much for joining in. I was just reading up about the self-sovereign identity, and I came across Christopher Allen's work, and I sort of liked that concept about, how SSI is more like an ideology as well as an architecture. And ideology in terms of defining how we can sort of reclaim human dignity and authority in the digital world. In terms of how we translate it to architecture, it is absolutely evident, because that has to sort of translate to process to enable that kind of movement in the decentralized identity space. So for today's session, we are joined by an elite list of panelists across the globe. Thank you so much for taking the time out. It's hard to take out 2 hours from busy schedules, but thank you so much. We appreciate it. We appreciate it a lot. Joining me on the panel discussions today, as mentioned before, is Shiv Aggarwal. Shiv is the CEO of MyEarth.Id, and he is also the GBA Europe lead and UK president. Shiv is a technology entrepreneur with a focus on improving human lives through the power of technology. So Shiv is going to be doing our first presentation on decentralized identity, following which we will have our first group of panelists from the Fintech space. The Fintech panelists are Jeffrey Peel, Arwen Smit, Lex Sokolin, and Devjani Mohanty. Following the Fintech panel, we will have the healthcare panel specialist, Heather Leah Flannery, Ingrid Vassiliou-Feltis, Rakesh Sriram Batla, and Indira Mysore are going to be joining us in that panel, which will be moderated by Gerard Dash. So thank you so much once again, and without further ado, and with respect to everyone's time, I hand over the baton to Shiv now. So Shiv, over to you and your presentation on decentralized identity as the next gen revolution.
Thank you very much, Neha, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone. This is the first in series. We'll be talking about decentralized identity across different verticals of the industries over the next few months, and this is the first one that we are kicking off today. Obviously, I think identity is a very, very crucial concern for everyone around us, right? Because that is how we build trust with each other in every interaction that we have, be it digital or be it physical. And I think that is what Identity is also about. So it's basically Identity is a decentralized identity management platform that allows onboarding, verification, and authentication of users. It helps businesses avoid identity thefts and frauds, reduce onboarding friction, and save time and cost associated with the identity verification processes. It actually empowers users with data ownership, consent, and privacy. And today we'll basically look at the concept that Identity is all about, right? The self-sovereign identity, the decentralized identity. But let's start with what is the current problem statement with respect to the identity that we are here to discuss and solve. So as per a World Bank report, there are over 1 billion people who do not have any form of identity. And then there are more than 3 billion people who don't have a digital presence, right? So if we kind of try to understand this particular statement, it means that there are over 3 billion people who are not participating in the digital economy. We are living in the industry 4.0, where we are talking about everything digital. We are talking about technologies like blockchain, AI, and so many others, right? And still there's a huge section of society which is not participating, or they don't have basic access. They don't have access to basic amenities. They don't have access to credit, and they are living in poverty. And this is one of our biggest challenge that organizations and government across the world face today. And this is not just about underdeveloped or developing countries. This is actually across the world. Even developed countries like US, UK, and others, even they have this as a massive challenge. Next slide, please. So as per a World Bank report, actually digital identity is actually is the key to this particular problem statement. And then a digital identity can actually unlock economical potential worth 3 to 13% of GDP by 2030. And depending on the size or the shape of the country, there are different percentages that can be basically looked at. I want to pick a specific example about India, because India actually did a huge program, which I think most of us would have heard about. It's Aadhaar, which was a digital identity program that was launched more than 10 years ago as a part where a digital identity was issued to more than 1 billion people, 1 billion citizens of India. And the purpose of that was to basically bring the people into the system, so that that they can have access to bank accounts, they can have access to basic insurance. And then it created a great value for people who were from underprivileged society or people who are living in poverty. And actually, on back of this particular program, a new industry came into picture, which is micro lending. So now people who were lacking credit access, they can now basically get micro loans, like maybe $100 or £100, and then they can go about their lives with respect to educating their children and getting access to basic amenities, right? And that basically drives social and financial inclusion. Next slide, please. So, but obviously, as we said, right? So digital identity is the solution, but then obviously when you issue a digital identity to people, there are certain problems that come into picture. And then the biggest one is basically data breaches and identity thefts and frauds. So when we look at the top data breaches across 21st centuries, you can look at all the big brand names that basically kind of deals with the data of billions of people across the world, right? And then you can think about a brand and they have been breached in certain part of the history or the century. And that creates a massive problem, right? Because obviously when we are talking about the digital economy, we are talking about the exchanging of information and then the storage of that information. And obviously that is currently stored in centralized repositories, and then they are being managed and issued by central systems, which eventually causes problems like data thefts, identity thefts, and frauds. Next slide, please. So when we talk about identity management with respect to how organizations, governments, how they issue, manage, store, and use identity of people, that concept is known as identity management. And actually, it's a $1 trillion problem. So the biggest aspect associated with identity is this cost. So as of today, the cost of global fraud is $5 trillion. And actually, large financial institutions, they spend more than $500 million annually to basically go through the processes like KYC, identity verification. And also there's another cost associated with this with respect to identity fraud. So whenever an identity thefts happen, there's a huge financial and reputational risk that goes along with it. With respect to time aspect, obviously, because when the organizations are talking about their users, their customers, their other stakeholders, there's a time frame with respect to when they can actually onboard the users and how they basically provide services. That itself is a huge time frame. Banks are currently spending more than a few days to onboard their users, and this is not just for financial organizations. This is true for all industries across the board, even governments, to onboard their citizens on public platforms. And that is where there's a huge time aspect as well associated with identity management. And lastly, security of the information, right? As we discussed, there are so many data breaches. 7.9 billion records were breached in 2019 itself. And most of the times, the data breaches happen due to poor password or stolen passwords. So in that sense, identity management is a huge problem that the organizations across the world are still struggling to solve. Next slide, please. So the solution that we have is decentralized self-sovereign identity. Let's break it down further. So there are three solution drivers to this particular concept. One is digital identity, which we have kind of discussed, then decentralization, and then self-sovereignty. So digital identity is very crucial for driving social and financial inclusion by providing access to global services, right? And decentralization is about how do you reduce the store, how do you basically remove the centralized storages and the problems associated with them. So it's about how do you reduce data breaches and how do you basically remove cybersecurity risks. And self-sovereignty is about empowering the users with the data ownership, privacy, and consent. And it's also about ensuring a compliance with the regulations, right? Because around the world, now we are talking about regulations like GDPR, PDPB in India, which are basically pushing organizations to basically handle the data of users in a proper way and not misusing them. And that is where it is a massive challenge with respect to organizations, with respect to cost of compliance and cost of non-compliance. So self-sovereignty can actually solve that problem as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think we all understand this concept, right? What is digital identity? So digital identity, basically, it could be your personal information, which is like your name, your address, or your age or your gender, and then basically your biometrics, your login credentials. So because obviously everybody has their biometrics, but then when we talk about login credentials, we are using so many digital services that and every platform basically provides us with a pair of a user ID and a password. So that also forms a part of our digital identity. Then we have our financial information, we have our medical information, we have our insurance. So all these things basically kind of form our digital identity that we exchange with people and organizations when we are trying to access services. And as of today, we are talking about two types of different identities, right? One is centralized, which is issued and managed by centralized authorities like government organizations or maybe a corporate, and they are solely responsible with respect to issuing, managing, and removal of that particular identity. The user doesn't have any control. Then we have federated, where there are more than one organizations collaborating and issuing an identity to the users, which can be used for accessing different services within that collaboration. But and both these models have issues, and that is where we are going to talk about a new model, which is decentralized identity, right? Wherein the control as well as storage of identity is not necessarily with one central authority, and the data is also not stored in a central repository. Next slide, please. So the key concept about this thing is self-sovereignty, which is basically how do you ensure that the identity of the user is owned by him, and then he or she is basically in complete control with respect to what information they want to share and with whom and when. And these are key pillars of self-sovereignty. So it's about security, in the sense like a self-sovereign identity should be able to provide privacy and confidentiality. It's about control, in the sense like the user should be in complete control with respect to when they want to create it, when they want to use it, and when they want to delete it. It's about consent. Consent is a very important keyword here, because obviously I think when we are accessing global services, or when we are exchanging our information with global organizations or people, we are doing that for a specific reason. And I think the consent is very important here, in the sense that we are providing our consent to organizations for a specific purpose, and they should only use our information for that specific context only. Then it's about portability, that your identity should work on more than one device and you should be able to use it across platforms. It's about persistent, that it should not be destructible. It's something which the user should be able to control. The resilience, in the sense like no central authority should be able to take it away. Again, it's tied to the control aspect. And then minimalistic, right? It's again privacy, in the sense like what information I want to share for what purpose. In some cases, I have to just verify my age. So I should be able to just verify my age rather than sharing my entire passport or driving license. Next slide, please. So when we put together everything with respect to digital identity, decentralization, and self-sovereignty, this is basically, it translates into a new concept, which is decentralized self-sovereign identity. And there are three key actors into this equation. One is the credential issuer, basically the identity issuer. And then we have a credential verifier, basically the requester or the service provider, or the organization which is requesting information from the user. And the credential holder, basically the user whose identity we are talking about here. And in this, when we talk about decentralized self-sovereign identity, basically the credential issuers, and they could be universities, they could be government authorities, they could be healthcare providers, and they would be able to basically issue their specific certificates, and they are called verifiable credentials. And they would be able to issue those credentials directly to the user wallet, instead of basically giving them a physical copy like a passport or driving license or birth certificate. They would be able to issue this directly to the user wallet, which could be on a mobile device, which could be somewhere else, but in the cloud. But then it's completely controlled by the user in terms of what they want to do with those credentials, right? And as I said, right, the credentials could be anything. It could be a membership, it could be my birth certificate, it could be my university degree. And then the issuers would be able to issue them directly to me. And then they would be also able to record a proof that this credential has been issued to a user on the distributed ledger as a proof that this identity is valid and belongs to this said user. And when a credential verifier or a requester, like a bank, wants to verify your identity, they would be able to request it directly from you, and then they would be able to verify whatever you have shared because there's a proof on the ledger as well, right? So it's not that the user, the requester has to rely on the user to basically share the right information, because they can now verify it against the ledger, and then likewise the user is not worried about what the mishandling or misuse of the information by the requesters. So what this translates is that this solution basically builds a trust between the three parties here, the issuer, the user, and the verifier, and then they are able to kind of work in a more optimized way with respect to the different aspects of identity verification processes. Next slide, please. At Identity, what we have done is, like, we have taken all these concepts and we have basically come up with a few services like digital identity, decentralized identity, digital KYC, selective data sharing, trust score, physical access, keyless entry. So what it means is that with one concept, which is decentralized self-sovereign identity, you can actually build different services which can be provided to organizations as well as users. And when we talk about specific applications across industries, sky is the limit, right? Because obviously identity management is a cross-cutting concern. And that is where every organization, be it public or private, they need an identity, right? And that is where we have a lot of applications across banking, finance, with respect to KYC, fraud prevention, telecom industry, with respect to eSIM activation, because that is what we are moving towards. And then healthcare, right? Because I think that is very important as industry, which we are going to discuss later today, where we are talking about the identity of the patients, the healthcare professionals, and the access to the healthcare records. And then obviously it has applications across corporates and public sector. Next slide, please. We also have a lot of applications across public sector, right? Because obviously, as we discussed, Aadhaar is like a national ID program, and similarly, other countries are also talking about it. So we have similar discussions in UK, in Australia, and other countries as well, where there are national ID programs which want to explore this technology with respect to having a secure identity for their citizens. Similarly, e-voting, because obviously we have seen that there are a lot of issues with respect to how elections are conducted today. But then with this technology, e-voting could be more privacy oriented and more secure and safe. And similarly, there are a lot of more applications across public sector as well. Next slide, please. So I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Back to you, Neha.
Thank you so much, Shiv, for that wonderful presentation. I am absolutely delighted to welcome our FinTech panel this evening here in India, and of course afternoon in London. Thank you so much once again, Shiv, for setting the stage and for telling all those people. A lot of us are from the decentralized identity space, so these things are a given. But for all those people who, they need to know about what the potential of decentralized identity is and how it can be implemented across, different kind of use cases and verticals. So today in our first panel, we will explore how decentralized identity can be implemented in the FinTech space. I am absolutely delighted to welcome our panelists today. I'm going to do a quick introduction about all our panelists. We are joined first by Arwen Smit. Arwen is the author of Identity Reboot, Reimagining Data Privacy in the 21st Century. Her work is focused on technology ethics and its intended and unintended consequences on society. Arwen is also the founder of Mintbit, a boutique consultancy specializing in blockchain identity and strategy to help companies build sustainable businesses for blockchain. Arwen has spoken across multiple platforms ranging from the European Commission, the European Space Agency, to the London Business School and the Rotterdam School of Management. She's also an independent expert at European Commission, and I'm so delighted that she's joined us in this panel discussion today. Arwen is also working on her next book, and then we can definitely explore that in the panel discussion that comes forward. Our next panelist this evening is Lex Sokolin. Lex is the global FinTech co-head for Consensus, one of the biggest names in blockchain. Lex is a futurist and entrepreneur working on the next generation of financial services. Lex focuses on emerging digital assets, public and private enterprise blockchain solutions, decentralized finance, and autonomous organizations. As part of building views around fintech and futurism, Lex frequently contributes to the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Financial Times, Reuters, American Banker. He has also spoken on the future of technology at various forums ranging from Money 2020, Lendit, The Economy, General Assembly, Invest, T3 Enterprise Edition, and the FPA conferences. Thank you so much, Lex, for joining in. Our third elite panelist this evening is somebody with years of experience behind him. Jeff Peel joins us as our third panelist. Jeff is a specialist at the Department for International Trade for the UK government, department in Whitehall, focusing on enterprise. Jeff has a software investment client companies from USA, Canada, Australia to New Zealand, and has worked in senior technology, marketing, and communications roles across these kind of organizations. In addition to that, Jeff has worked with startups, scale-ups, cybersecurities, entrepreneurs, software, fintech, professional services, and large enterprises. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us this afternoon. Jeff is also a regular speaker on the international conference circuit and has spoken recently on topics such as digital marketing, smart cities, blockchain, and the digital government. Our final panelist this evening is Debjani Mohanty. Debjani is the author of 5 Amazon bestseller books on blockchain, ranging from Ethereum, R3 Corda, Ripple, some of which have been translated into German and Chinese to reach the masses. Her latest book, Blockchain for Self-Sovereign Digital Identity, is a rare work that elaborates the protocols that can be used for SSI with their comparative analysis and some innovative use cases this emerging technology can bring in. Debjani is also a solution architect with close to 2 decades of industry experience in architecture and development, and has been part of many blockchain solutions which have been appreciated across the world. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hand it over to you, Arwen, to start with your introduction, and then we'll go in the same order, and then I'll throw some questions at you.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Neha, for that beautiful introduction, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the panel to hear everybody's views. Maybe it's worth highlighting why I decided to focus on digital identity within my own professional career, because as you mentioned, I helped the European Commission under the Horizon 2020 program on digital identity. I also work as a venture partner for a VC in London, specifically for the self-sovereign identity angle, and I did write a book about it. And the reason why I thought it was very important, and which kind of led me down this rabbit hole to start writing the book, is that obviously the whole world has moved online, but meanwhile the public sector has left a significant gap, which the private sector naturally and completely understandably stepped in to fill that void. So what you get is this very strange mix of how identity works. So you had originally a passport introduced by governments to track people. You layer on top of that the social logins that we have now from the major platforms such as Google, such as Facebook, which of course have as a rationale to increase advertising revenue. And the foundation of algorithmic advertising is that it's underpinned by a more extractive data economy. And then on top of that, you have this reputation layer introduced by Uber and Airbnb, where reputation is used to share high value assets. So the result is that you create this strange mix of identity layers, all with completely different reasons for existence. And none of them actually involves the people that need this identity to prove who they are, who they have been, and make a stake on their claims. So I just leave it at that and look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Arwen. Lex, could you please come and introduce yourself to all of us now, please?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much for for having me and certainly Consensus well represented here. I'm struggling with a cold, so hopefully you can hear whatever it is that I have to say, and excuse, I'll blame anything fuzzy that I say on that. My background is actually not in identity, it's in Fintech, and in particular Fintech entrepreneurship. So I spent about a decade thinking about personal finance and the journey that people take through interaction with digital financial services, be that investing or payments or banking or insurance. And I think the place that I've come to now is the importance of manufacturing financial products in a decentralized manner and what that implies. And Consensus is, as you mentioned, one of the core companies that touch open source programmable blockchains, in particular because there are both the public blockchains like Ethereum, where you can do a lot of the edge of innovation. And then there are the private permissioned versions of Ethereum like Quorum, on which you can stand up enterprise projects. And Consensus is on both sides of that. So, on the one hand, we MetaMask, which is now I believe around 1 or 1.5 million monthly active users interacting with the decentralized web, that user base is thinking about, how do I get payments and savings and banking out of Ethereum? And you're starting to have all the questions around KYC and what you keep private, what you keep public. And then simultaneously, we're working with some of the world's largest institutions, financial and trade, supply chain, building out networks for them to operate mutualized software. And in the enterprise case, you get to the questions of, how do I make sure that my business counterparty is my business counterparty, and that the people representing that are the right ones. And so you get the other part of the equation. And so for us at Consensus, this is highly relevant. And I've also been an admirer of the fintech progress that India has made as the result of being able to give people a way to digitally prove who they are. So super excited to learn more from the panelists and go in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Lex, for joining us today. And you look much better than a few days ago. So I think you're on the right track. Thank you once again. I'd like to welcome Jeffrey Peel for his introduction and just throw us light on your years of experience and the work that you do with the UK government.
Thank you very much indeed. And it's brilliant to be at this event. I've been first of all, I should explain who I am. I'm a specialist at the Department for International Trade, and that means I tend to work with early to growth stage companies that are keen to grow internationally and grow from a UK base. And the UK tends to attract a very large number of technology companies, and increasingly companies that are underpinned by blockchain. And blockchain is probably becoming one of the most buoyant subsectors in technology, and is still sustaining foreign direct investment as well. So it's fabulous to see. I don't know why, but I have been a kind of blockchain fanboy for a number of years. Just shortly before joining the Department for International Trade, I run my own consulting company, and I ran an event in conjunction with Allen and Overy, the law firm, and they have a small incubator which supports early stage companies. And I organized an event in conjunction with Allen and Overy, and there was a sort of weird and wonderful collection of companies, and there was something about the people behind them, and really this is key to blockchain, because the people who are attracted to blockchain tend to be people who have a similar outlook on life. For example, they tend to dislike centralization. They tend to applaud the concept of the individual, and they tend to be pretty libertarian in outlook as well. And I think those are great attributes upon which to build a business model. The other thing that I did around that time is I read a book, and this is a fabulous book, and I keep touching on it as well. It's by a guy called George Gilder. I don't know how old George Gilder is. He's very old, but he's got an unnerving talent at being able to sort of touch into the technology zeitgeist and come up with some really wonderful predictions. And just before this session, I thought I would just
Jeff, you're on
mute.
How long have I been on mute? How much did you miss?
Start from when you started reading from the book.
Oh, right, okay. So this from George Gilder's book called Life After Google. And he says, security is not a benefit or upgrade that can be supplied by adding new layers of passwords, ponytailed SWAT teams, intrusion detective schemes, antivirus patches, malware prophylactics, and software retro fixes. Security is the foundation of all other services and crucial to all financial transactions. It is the most basic and indispensable component of any information technology. And I think that's absolutely the nub of the issue. If we cannot get security right, we're not getting information technology right. And the existing paradigms that are just not fit for purpose have to be changed. And this is an opportunity, decentralized identity, to create a new lingua franca, a new secure architecture, which will open up new opportunities. And I think Shiv did a really good job in terms of referring to them. You know, just in terms of the costs associated with security breaches, it's not just the cost in terms of fixing the breach, but it's also the cost perhaps in terms of horrendous increase in hike in insurance for companies that have data breaches. It's about the loss of integrity. It's about the defection of customers. It's about downgrading by the rating agencies. It's about stock price degradation. These are all of the consequences of data breach and an inability to protect individual personal data. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to start getting this right and to put in place new architectures for financial services. So that's my rant over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. I'll hand it over to Debjani now to throw light on her amazing work on blockchain. Over to you, Debjani.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neha, for this fabulous introduction. So hello, everyone. So Neha has already introduced me. I'm an author of 5 Amazon bestseller books on blockchain. And my latest work is on the name of the book is Blockchain for Self-Sovereign Digital Identity. It's a rare work that elaborates on the different protocols available in the market on SSI, and also that elaborates the comparative analysis between all the protocols. And it's really helpful if somebody wants to build a project on SSI. And I'm also a keynote speaker at some of the biggest summits in the world on emerging technology. And I'm featured as a blockchain accelerator from India for the year 2019 and 20 by CoinCrunch. I'm also a solution architect and been part of many pioneer blockchain solutions appreciated globally, and some of which are very early work of decentralized identity. So one of the recent projects that I worked on is a European telecom regulatory, where we had used this technology. So in fact, in the last 2 years, I have been mostly involved in decentralized identity projects. And then I started thinking of crafting a very practical and sustainable decentralized identity solution, which yet to be seen in the market. So currently, that's why I'm working with MyEarth.Id to build a highly scalable, high throughput SSI solution, and also which has a feature to integrate biometrics and passwordless authentication mechanisms. So we are using Hashgraph for it, which is, like Shiv has already covered in his slides. It's superior in terms of its scalability and throughput. And hopefully soon, we would be part of many of the innovative next-gen identity solutions in near future. Thank you so much, Neha.
Thank you so much, Debjani, and thank you to all the panelists for introducing themselves. Yeah, so some of my first questions on, how sort of we can implement decentralized identity in the fintech space rise from the challenges that the fintech space has. We are all aware of those kind of problems around trust, around data breaches, around, personal information being compromised. And there should be a way out, and of course we believe that decentralized identity is one of the ways out. But I want to hear it from the panelists, and any one of you can take that question.
Better for you. I just sent you a Dropbox folder, the Dropbox link.
Gerard, you're on unmute. So I'll just say that again. So my first question is around the challenges that the fintech industry faces in terms of, how about the implementation, number one, of decentralized identity. And of course, you've all been working in this space. So what are your thoughts on how these can be resolved? And I leave it open. This is an open question. Any one of you can take it. Arwen, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I think it's helpful if we make a few definitions first. So the way I personally see digital identity is that it is a collection of claims about who you are and who you have been, so the historics as well, which accumulates to a foundation of rights in society. Then if you look at specifically what self-sovereign identity is, I think that would amount to the authentication, so the verification of claims, which are attestations, which allow you to do things, which will be the authorization layer. Now, these claims or these attestations are kind of roughly appearing into three categories. So you have inherent attestations, meaning that they're inalienable to you. So for example, my date of birth, or they could be assigned. So it could be relationship based, such as citizenship, or they could be accumulated. So it could be behavioral, like education. And specifically for the fintech sector, these three categories are of interest for different reasons. But there is a very clear commercial rationale, I would argue, why the fintech sector specifically should look at self-sovereign identity. So not least of all the potential to reduce fraud. There is significant value in knowing that the information that you're interacting with is worth acting on. Then also something that a lot of people don't mention, but there's actually a huge cost involved, is the cost that is currently incurred with the gathering of data, the duplication of data, the storage of data, which might not be worth acting on. And then a third one that I think is worth mentioning from the commercial side, and this again is especially relevant for fintech, is compliance. So in Europe, we already see GDPR. In California specifically, we see new legislation coming up. So we do see globally kind of this new narrative around what privacy expectations citizens might have. We see that new narrative take shape, and arguably if it's easier to get to the data that we need to get to, the tendency for over collection is reduced, meaning that compliance will hopefully be improved.
Yes, I would just chip in that I totally agree. The GDPR regulation was a kind of response to the fact that these legacy technologies were being used. You know, the whole basis of the General Data Protection Regulation is pretty much defined because it mandates a set of business processes to ensure that personal data is protected, and that organizations put in place processes to ensure that there aren't breaches. However, that kind of precipice, or edifice rather, is built in the entire concept of legacy, centralized security and data privacy architectures. There is here an opportunity to move beyond that and say, actually, this is simply not fit for purpose. And the fact that we have a number of standards committees and we have the involvement of a number of major technology players such as Microsoft, for example, in the whole area of decentralized identity is encouraging, because at least it means that organizations are getting the fact that in order to, and I think Shiv alluded to it, in order to free up this sort of GDP growth opportunity from the financial services sector and to allow people to get access to banking and financial services that have been denied it in the past, we're going to have to get this thing right. So the emergence of standards bodies and major corporations getting involved in it in terms of the platform technologies is encouraging. But now we need to see the financial services organizations themselves getting on board. I think the financial services companies have essentially said that they're going to take everything off net. That's the other consequence really as well of this whole move towards securitization of legacy systems. They say, well, the internet is just so fundamentally insecure that we don't want to play, and therefore they take their systems offline. As far as the general public is concerned, they certainly don't want to share it on the internet. But I think with decentralized identity, we can once again go back to initial principles of what the internet is all about.
Yep, that's right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. And I'm glad you mentioned that, in the direction of financial services. And my next question is to you, Lex, coming from Consensus and with that background in financial services, having built robo-advisors for companies and for yourself, for your own companies, what is your vision of the future of identity? And, how do you think it's going to pave the way for the fintech space in the coming years? And, of course, if there are specific use cases with reference to Consensus and how Consensus is doing it, we'd love for you to share them here now.
Sure. It's a super difficult question to even start and think about. I think where my intuition pulls me is there are many folks on this panel, and I think there's lots of resources out there that can paint the picture of how nice the world would be if. And this is something that happens with blockchain very often, and it certainly happens with entrepreneurship because everyone is trying to raise money and tell the story of how their particular logic tree is the answer to what's going to happen. And I'm one of these people. I can tell you a logic tree that's very compelling. I think what's really important, however, is navigating through the mess in which we exist. And the difficulty is that what we really all want, maybe philosophically, is we want sort of like this reversal of the tragedy of Google and Facebook, where we've individually trade away what feels like small bits to collectively give away the most important thing without even knowing it. And so this concept of like, well, let's reverse that and let's make the trade again such that we preserve privacy and we are self-sovereign and so on. But we know that at the individual sort of like micro layer for every person, they would sell their soul for a free video every single day. Like, people will give away their passport to download Game of Thrones for free. Like, it's not even, there's no rational actor behavior at an individual level. And so this is kind of the tragedy, the bad game theory equilibrium. And so the question is, how do we get out of it? And I think there are many designs that can be implemented, and I think the discussion around standards is super important. But there's these two barriers around, number one, what developers will build, because developers are people, or they're rationally minded economic actors in terms of the Microsofts and various companies, and they're going to build things that other people can integrate. So if decentralized identity doesn't integrate into the Wells Fargo KYC system, we will never have decentralized identity. And similarly for individuals, like I as an individual, to me, there's no difference between a wallet, a payment wallet, a crypto wallet, Apple Pay, and financial, Venmo. It's all just stuff on my phone. And so we can't, it's very difficult to introduce cognitive load about a different way to authenticate and to give people homework. And so neither the building nor the the human behavior, we can't ask for more from, I think, individuals. So I think the main challenge is figuring out how to do this behind the scenes. And if you were talking about centralized identity, it's an easy answer, which is like you go and tell people what to do. And this in large part is why I think the Indian project succeeded. And if you interpret, for example, and financial as a payment identity on which basically all of web commerce lives. And the reason that Ant is going to IPO for 300 billion, again, it's the vision and the commercial pull of a centralized actor. And so I guess all of this rambling is to express a concern for how do we ground our designs in the practical reality of trying to implement something where it's so hard to coordinate people, and what is the leverage really that we have to do it. And I'd love other panelists to address some of that.
I can react to that. I don't mind taking the first step.
I was just going to point to you. Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead, Arwen.
Thank you very much, Lex, for introducing the skepticism. And I do think it's much needed in a lot of these discussions. And I always think that there is an inherent challenge between, first of all, helping people realize that self-sovereign identity could indeed be very meaningful, and then almost immediately after kind of dropping the bombshell, yes, but this is not going to be easy by any stretch. So I think one of the first problems that you're going to run into, and you kind of alluded to this already, is besides the standard, but who is going to be responsible for what? I think that a very rough first draft of that might look like that governments or the public sector is going to be responsible for a version of foundational digital identity or foundational SSI, as they were responsible for the passports originally in the 20th century. And then I think that's going to be layered by contextual identity. So to give a more concrete example, a government might attest to my full name and date of birth, but the contextual part of the educational institutions that I've attended would be covered by some form of the private sector or public-private partnerships. So I think that's one part of it. Who is going to be responsible for what, for it to be trusted and have sufficient value? But the thing is, and I'm pretty sure you can appreciate this better than anyone else, is as soon as you start building, you're going to run into a lot of trade-offs that are inherent with any product that you're building. So if you start thinking about consensus and decentralization, you have to think, okay, is it all parties that have to reach consensus, or just the transaction parties? Or if you think about governance as such, and I've seen this break down, especially among large consortia, is that it can either be too prescriptive, but it could also be too loose. And the consequence of both is that nobody ends up using it. And to find a way in the middle there is an incredibly delicate balance. So that's definitely one to watch out for. And just to kind of sum up my train of thought, I think that blockchain is a feature set. It's a sequence of design decisions. And in the end, what makes it truly self-organizing, I think, is workable governments. So if we fix the governance layer of self-sovereign identity, or at least come with an early workable solution, then we can actually, hopefully, start getting to the true benefits of the promise.
So Neha, I would like to answer this question also. So in my view, the way traditional blockchain works is different from the way SSI works. In traditional blockchain, every party is equal, right? It's a democracy. Every party has to throw some votes, then only the consensus would be achieved. But here, there should be a initiator. Like in SSI, the person is collecting all the credentials from different parties. So it could be a child is born, the first set of credential is coming from the hospital. Now the child is going to join the school, the second set of credential would come from the school. The third set of credential could come from the university. The fourth set would come from the employer. The fifth maybe from the bank, like that. You know, the person is collecting his credentials from different parties. So we have to make sure that who is the first party. So there are workable solutions and people are working on it. Different governments are working on it. You know, there is a product from UK government, there is a product from Canada, Australia, Singapore, and some of which have even gone to production in a limited capacity. And it's mostly the government who is the initiator. I think I just recently heard about the UK government. Is it UK government? And I have to clarify that again. But what they're doing, the first set of credentials would be saved to the user's wallet or identity storage by the government. So that is a certified data from the government. Now using that data, the user can log into different private sectors, or private applications. So in my view, it's always the government who has to be the initiator.
So I find it, I'm never the critic. I'm always, I'm always like driving off a cliff in a rocket that's made of diamonds. But so it's weird for me to be in this position, and it's not necessarily one I wanted to put up as a blocker, but rather that I think you have to go back to the so maybe yes, maybe this will be a government provision or the provision by somebody like Ant or Facebook, and in some way that to me starts feeling counter to the decentralized ethos that would motivate a lot of the people who are building this stuff. So I kind of, if we get the incentives right at the individual level for the builders and for the users, then you can back solve into what is the shape. Instead of a top-down design of like accruing all the attributes of the information and the identifiers in this perfect way, you can kind of back solve the individual incentives. So for example, and this is maybe projecting my own preferences, but like, again, I will trade my privacy away for a bagel. Like there's individually, nobody really, I think if you look at the studies, it's something like, $3 to $5 people would pay for $3 to $5. They would give away their privacy to Facebook. It's individually, it doesn't work. It's when you say, oh, there's 1 billion people, and collectively this is the financial cost of this compromise, that it becomes a clear problem. So I think if we have something worth accessing with your decentralized identity, then it works. So like for all of you, if I give you $1 billion, if you just put an app on your phone to do decentralized identity, and it takes you like 3 days to set it up right, you'd still do it. You get $1 billion. And so that's the question, is like, why are you putting people through this process? And it's not for the principle of it or because it is intrinsically satisfying. It's because there's a benefit, and there's a benefit for individuals in decentralized finance, through MetaMask to access these new financial protocols and achieve certain financial outcomes. There's a benefit for companies to perform KYC, AML better and experience less fraud and less risk in their financial performance. There's a benefit in terms of lowering kind of reconciliation and settlement costs inside of consortia. So I think at least a lot of my intuition is around emphasizing the sort of the benefit over the cost and change that people have to do, and I think lowering the complexity of the implementation, so that anybody could jump in and start doing it. So I'm really excited when folks talk about standard bodies, because I think that creates a lot of innovation.
I think though there are opportunities to do things pretty iteratively, where it's clear from the consumer's point of view that there's something in it for them. And I absolutely take your point, Lex. The fact is that despite all of the talk about Facebook being the evil empire, you know, people still use their services and use Instagram and WhatsApp and all of the various brands that they own. But of course, in terms of the critical relationships that we have, we are obviously a bit more careful in terms of what we divulge, particularly in terms of banking relationships. The interesting thing about Facebook is it's kind of got the message that in terms of owning identity, it potentially could own financial relationships with individuals. And the proof of that is in terms of its potential foray into digital currencies. And of course, now we're seeing the emergence of central bank digital currencies as well. They haven't done a particularly good job in terms of managing money up to this point, in terms of managing fiat currencies, but now they suddenly want to get into the digital currency space. But the fact is the people who will do this best will win the war. And it's already happening, particularly in Europe. We have contactless payments. Now, I know it's not decentralized identity, but the fact is that we are now used to traveling right across Europe, and we're able to pay for things using the fingerprint identification and biometrics on our phones. And that, of course, is an example of decentralized identity, but it just isn't actually hooked up to the banking systems at the other end. It's a kind of combo of legacy and decentralization, but it does show that people will adopt it when it suits their particular interests.
Have you seen the Amazon announcements that you can pay by palm? So if you go to the Amazon Go store, they machine vision your palm, and that is your biometric. And of course, it's COVID proof because you're not touching anything with your thumb. So I think, you know, there's certainly nothing more tangible than the physical self, and I think that's quite interesting.
That's a brilliant perspective, and I sort of love it. My only thing that sort of draws me to it is the whole universal concept of it. Irrespective of where you are, and if I were to travel across to Australia or someplace else, and the fact that I could sort of use something which is in my phone, and it empowers me. At the end of the day, technology that works is only technology that empowers people. It puts people, power back in the hands of the people. So yeah, this has just been a brilliant panel. And I thought that 40 minutes. I had a long list of questions for everyone, but we've sort of closed in. We are zeroing in on almost like 47 minutes now. So thank you so much for those brilliant insights. And I'm sure there are so many more questions and so many more perspectives which are hard to sort of fit in these 40 minutes. But irrespective of that, I really, really appreciate your time and work, and thank you so much for joining in. On that note, I would sort of like to hand over the panel to Gerard Dash, Executive Director, GBA, who's now going to moderate the healthcare panel for us. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And so my name is Gerard Dash, Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association, and I'm actually honored that Shiv and MyEarth.Id and Consensus folks would ask me to monitor this. We're running short on time, so I'm going to get right into it. The format that we're going to use is a little different. I'm going to basically ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, basically to identify, where they've come from, where they are now, and where they're going for about 3 minutes each. And then I'm going to throw a topic out to them and let them discuss it simply because just an open dialogue like that works well. So Heather, let's start with you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, followed by Rakesh, and then we'll do Ingrid, and then after that, Indira.
Sure, thanks so much, Gerard. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. My name is Heather Flannery. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Consensus Health. We are the healthcare and life sciences arm, a spin-off of Consensus AG. So it's exciting to follow my colleague Lex as we look at our organization strategy and vision. I am a serial entrepreneur and technologist with a lifelong fascination with healthcare and the life sciences. And since 2005, I've dedicated my career in that direction. In addition to the role that I play at Consensus Health, I also co-chair a very prolific blockchain task force at the Health Information Management Systems Society, or HIMSS. And I have the honor to chair a standards development working group at IEEE, the only standard in development focusing specifically at the intersection of blockchain, machine learning, and the healthcare and life sciences industry. I take a complex adaptive systems view of the needs of our industry, and from an identity perspective, Consensus Health is working very closely with our colleagues at Consensus Identity, and bringing very deep industry knowledge and unique requirements of our field into the creation of global identity infrastructure. A top priority for me is ethical intentionality and the avoidance of unintended consequences in the implications of the use of these technologies, and taking an accountable view as healthcare and life sciences professionals about the way that we work with, experiment with, and study, importantly, using classical empirical methods, the population health and clinical implications on every human being on Earth who would be impacted in some way by the evolution of this tech. So glad to be here, excited about this conversation, and I'll hand it off to the next esteemed co-panelist.
And I also want to mention that Heather is a very sought after speaker, and I think next at the end of the month you're going to be with Don Tapscott in Toronto, right?
I am indeed, and
Yeah.
Gerard, you're too kind. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing you there. Okay, Rakesh, why don't you introduce yourself again? What's your background? What are you doing, and where are you going?
Definitely. Thanks a lot, Gerard, and thanks a lot, MyEarth.Id, Shiv, and Neha for giving this opportunity to be on this panel. Again, I'm greatly honored, excited to be on this panel with everyone and each one of you. Heather, I'm part of your HIMSS task force that you kind of mentioned. I've been very active for the last 2 years since I've attended a panel or a discussion at HIMSS in 2018, I believe, and the blockchain symposium that was there. So that put me into this whole world of blockchain, and I've been very engaged since then. First of all, I want to correct one thing though. I'm not a principal CEO of the company. I work as a CTO for Exponential Advisors. Anne Hill Ingram was supposed to be on this panel, and she kind of said, why don't you be on? She is the CEO. So I work as a CTO for the firm there, helping anything to relate with technology and blockchain. I'm also part of Gerard, like as part with Anne's and the company. I'm also part of your GBA, working in the background with her, trying to do whatever I can to help, GBA's mission move forward, right? Heather, I'm also part of your, Tiger team, which is working on Decentralized Identity survey. So again, I'm excited to be here, looking forward to the discussion. In my day job, though, I work with, I've been in, this EMR healthcare implementation space for over close to 12 years now, completely focused around interoperability, right? Which is, and identity is a problem that we need to solve to make sure that the healthcare data becomes interoperable. So that's how I pull myself into identity and start discussing about how to make healthcare data more interoperable and how can we leverage it. So that brings me into this whole discussion and why I want to be engaged.
And I also want to share that I have the most incredible amount of respect for you and Anne and your whole team. If you ever want to, we're going to hear from Ingrid in a second, who has a great ethics background, but this organization is off the charts in terms of their integrity. I kind of look, I view Anne as a mentor in the area of ethics and integrity. So you guys are just phenomenal people, and I really encourage people to interact with you guys. But also an incredible, just an incredible person in space, Dr. Ingrid. And I always, I always call you Ingrid because
don't worry,
I
Ingrid
struggle.
is fine.
Great, but I will say that from the first time I met Ingrid, every time I engage with her, she impresses me more and more. And just recently, she stepped onto the global stage with her role as the U.S. Director of the Global Blockchain, the Global Business Angel Investment Forum. So I've seen her interact with world leaders in that space. And she is also the GBA ethics officer, and just we're honored to have her as part of our organization. And I mean, Ingrid, you're go ahead and introduce again. What's your background? What are you doing, and where are you going?
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. I know we're all dedicated and super passionate to the blockchain space. From a healthcare perspective, I've been 15 years in the life sciences industry, working pretty much in every single facet, from clinical research, life sciences research, auditing, compliance, implementing EHRs, and implementing all kinds of other information systems. So I've dealt with interoperability challenges for very many years, too many. So I can concur with Rakesh that interoperability is probably the one thing that keeps me up at night. But in addition to that, I've had the opportunity through various roles as an advisor to companies globally to work with them on deploying blockchain. And currently, like Gerard already mentioned, I serve as the Chief Ethics Officer for the Government Blockchain Association. I'm also in the executive leadership of the World Business Angel Investment Forum, where I help not only with the global startup stage, so I interact with several thousand startups, sometimes all over the world, that are trying to deploy various technologies, not only blockchain. But lately, I'm happy to say that more than ever, I get blockchain startups across my inbox, so to speak. And then additionally, I also serve as an advisor to various international organizations for just digital tech implementation. Recently, actually, 2 weeks ago, we were at the European Union Commission talking about exactly this topic, decentralized identity and ethical considerations. So I'm very happy we're talking about this today. I think it's a crucial, very important aspect that we need to solve as a global society, not only in healthcare, but like we already alluded to before, there are many other industries. So my hope and my wish list for Christmas, so to speak, is that we have a more globalized effort, breaking silos, and solve not only what we talked today, but also portability and break regional barriers, because I think otherwise it's going to be very difficult to have mass adoption. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think the first time I met Indira, she took the certified GBA blockchain healthcare specialist course. And I realized then that we had a tiger by the tail, because she just kept asking me very insightful questions and demonstrated a very, very deep knowledge and expertise. And so with that, Indira, would you please like to tell them what's your background, what are you doing, and where are you going?
Thank you, Jared, for the good introduction, and thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and really humbled and honored to be invited to be part of this panel. My background kind of spans more than 25 years ago. I have been in the technology space, in IT, in various leadership role, deploying enterprise solutions for primarily global corporations, whether it's outsourcing or business process outsourcing in India, or consulting, and Fortune 100, 500 companies. I was part of Hewlett-Packard, Shell Oil, and aerospace defense company, Collins Aerospace. And my recent position was with Hoffmann La Roche, healthcare biotech pharma giant based out of Switzerland. So I have been in, I have worked and lived in 5 continents. So I have been in the United States for the last 30 years. And you know, as I have deployed enterprise systems in the last 25 plus years, and then the last 2 years I have been engaged in blockchain, because it's really resonated with kind of bringing together not only my experience, but also how this technology can add value to some of the core fundamental issues that we are facing across many industries, not just only healthcare. So I kind of look at this more from a process perspective, you know, as even within the 4 walls of an enterprise, even if it's a global corporation, when we optimize process, I mean, I'm sure we all have seen this at some point, is how you know, redundant, inefficient, a lot of things can be, that we keep doing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes it's very important to recognize and differentiate what is value-added and non-value-added activity if you have to drive efficiency and provide transparency in our processes to be able to reduce cost. I think that is much more so in the healthcare space with a $3.9 trillion healthcare cost, and which is just spiraling out of control. This is like a 18-wheeler truck going down a slope without a brake. So I think, you know, lot of countries also kind of face a similar problem as US. So I kind of look at this identity as very central to how we can improve processes. For instance, as a pharma company, if you look at it, you are getting your, returns of drugs from your wholesalers and pharmacies back to the manufacturers. You need to ensure that they are sellable returns, because these are audited, regulated processes. We need to even know who is who in this whole supply chain that we are dealing with. And if you're talking about a third-party risk management, because processes are not confined to enterprises anymore, this is a kind of new level of interoperability and collaboration that we are looking at, so that we don't redo the same thing over and over again about certifying a supplier. This is like you get your driver's license once and then you use it wherever you need to. So the same way you qualify a supplier once and for compliances, and then you don't need to do that again. Same way that you certify and qualify a doctor once, and then so that they can go practice their medicine. But 10 hospitals and 10 insurance companies need not do this over and over again, because this is a lost revenue, this is a loss of a service for the doctor. And in this more and more in this COVID space, when we have a need for more of telemedicine and telehealth, where we need doctors to be available regardless of where they are located in the country, and patients need to have access to medical services, so they need to be able to certify themselves once, be able to provide services wherever it is required across the country. So how I kind of begin to appreciate and recognize how critical this identity management, and then especially self-sovereign identity, so that somebody else is not owning our data and our processes. This is like, you are building a house. When you're building a house, you don't call your plumber and your electrician and your appliance manufacturer, and then you start your work, and then you wait for everybody to certify themselves before you kind of can build your house and complete your house. That's not how we function. So why is it not the same concept not applied when we work on enterprise processes? And especially because the collaboration is taken for granted in this global space. No business in enterprise is an island. So we need to find ways to differentiate and segregate what is value added and not value added, how much of it that we can certify, approve once, and have ownership of the essential processes and data once, and then focus on where the differentiators are. I think the self-sovereign identity is going to open the door for that kind of a thinking, or reimagine the process, a new way of doing business. I think that's what excites me about it. And I'm the board of advisors on Consensus Health. I'm also consulting with a couple of other healthcare startup companies. I'm part of the several nonprofits, including Government Blockchain Association on the healthcare work group. We are working on ethical framework. I'm also part of the identity management. I'm also part of the IEEE clinical supply chain group, as well as IOMT. So all these things are kind of being part of this panel and working with this nonprofit and consulting space. This is all brings all this great idea together. I'm really excited to hear other people's perspective and talking to you for the next 1 hour.
So as you might be able to tell, there's a certain amount of passion here, and certainly a lot of background and expertise and credibility. So let me throw the first question out, and it kind of dovetails right off of what Indira just said. We're talking about healthcare, so we're talking specifically about the patient, the healthcare professionals, and other stakeholders. So from that perspective, what's wrong with the way we're doing it right now? And well, let's just start with that. What's wrong with how it's being done? What are the problems that we're trying to solve?
Heather, it makes me want to ask Rakesh to surface the work that we're doing in our Tiger team, because it's that specific question is exactly what we're doing right now. We're concretizing and organizing the pain points that our industry experiences as a result. So I'll start a little bit, but then Rakesh, you've got great thoughts on this too, and I know because we've discussed it. For those that are not from our industry, there's a problem space called patient matching. And that is an enormous operational, analytical, and financial challenge that is a defining characteristic of the healthcare and life sciences industry. The way that health information flows is in both identified and de-identified structures, and depending on what jurisdiction you're talking about, every country in the world has some legal framework about what is required to consider some set of health information de-identified. And if you imagine two giant oceans of data flows and processes, you've got clinical medicine and clinical research, and then you've got public health and population health. And presently, those are completely different disciplines in healthcare and life sciences. They're different fields, they're different degrees, they're different infrastructures. And we live in a world where our health information is infinitely replicated and then renormalized again and again and again. And when you talk about scenarios in clinical medicine, it is actually not as obvious as you would think for provider organizations to know that they're working on the right patient, the right sample, the correct provider, you name it. So there is not presently in healthcare a cohesive strategy for dealing with identity of people, including healthcare providers, patients, caregivers, etc., devices and objects, entities, and all of the interrelationships between those different parties. So decentralized identity in this context is not only about self-sovereign identity of human beings, but being able to provide confirmation of all the different business, clinical, and scientific structures that have to work in our field, and the opportunity to clarify, organize, and really improve the cybersecurity posture. The last point I'll make, going back to this two worlds of of processes that flow off of de-identified health information and processes that flow off of identified health information, there are enormous costs to us as a species because of the burden it places on researchers to continuously have to deal with the de-identifying and re-identifying of information. I have a hypothesis that if we could resolve that conflict and we had other methods to preserve privacy, dignity, agency, and sovereignty instead of de-identifying data, we would be able to radically accelerate our research agenda and use that to save lives faster.
Yeah, excellent. Rakesh, did you want to ask? I see you smiling, so you're chomping at the bit.
No, I mean, yeah, I get very passionate about this, right? I mean, I've started my work in this HL7 interfaces and all this work 11, 12 years ago. And we've been talking about the same patient matching issues, since then. But it was only more about, back then, it was only about institutions. Within an institution or an organization, how do you make sure there's patients match, right? And then from there on, what is the next step for, making this healthcare delivery better, correct? And that led everyone to talk about interoperability, right? So as we go there, now the challenge becomes, why the healthcare data is not interoperable, right? Not changing the topic and diverting the topic. Why is it not interoperable? One is, I think, is the whole institutional biases or the industrial biases from EMR vendors or even institutions or healthcare institutions not wanting to share their data. That's one of the issue, right? And they have their own centralized identities, and it's whether they don't want to share it because they want to protect their patients and they don't want to lose their patient population, or is it because they can de-identify or figure out the consent that patient has given so that they can pass on their medical records to another institution, right? So there's a problem of both the institutions not wanting to share maybe, and then also the problem of how do you manage this consent, the patient consent, right? And then how do you manage that electronically, and how do you start sharing this? Because there's no easy way. I mean, that's what puts us into decentralized identity, right? Where you don't have to depend, or you don't have to have these institutions manage those IDs. Instead, patient would basically just give a consent and say, you know what, yes, I agree, right? I want to share my information, so I'm going to provide a key that would just let my information be shared with another institution or another provider that I want to go visit, right? So that's one of the problems. And the other biggest challenge for identity, I think, is the social determinants, right? As in, what's happening, why, I mean, as I think, the other panel also mentioned, or Shiv mentioned right at the beginning, right? There are like billions of people out there that don't have an identity or an ID that they can provide when they go to a healthcare institution. So again, I don't know if decentralized identity is going to solve that problem, but that still exists, right? So that's another biggest problem for identity. So I feel like at the bottom line, identity or a digital identity is something we've never been able to do it right? And again, that's my opinion. I think I'm being very passionate about it. So I'm saying I don't think we've never done it right, and people have just given up and started accepting the status quo in general. So how do we solve that? I think is the biggest. How do we change the perspective, in people's mind that, okay, no, it's not just an institution to manage my identity, but it's about how do I want to manage my own identity? I think Lex, in the previous panel mentioned this very well. I mean, I feel like when he was repeating about, why would a person get on and use an app to store his own identity, right? That was like, yep, you just took my point out of my mouth. Or it's just that, it's just like very passionate discussion. So I'll probably not stop. So let's.
Well, so you talked a little bit about from the patient perspective. Let's talk a little bit about the credentials, right? So you've got all these healthcare workers, and whenever there's a natural emergency or disaster, or you've got something like COVID, and you've got to move resources around. Are there any problems that we have with identity and credentials? And is there some space for improvements in the verified credentials area? Anybody want to jump on that one?
Absolutely. Actually, I'm working on a project now as well. Due to the nature of my role, I interact with more than 1,000 facilities nationwide for credentialing, and in each state, the median number of health plans that we have to do credentialing on top of the hospitals is about 40 to 130. So imagine overall that makes it on a monthly basis a nightmare to deal with provider credentialing. And it's a super redundant process. You have to redo your credentialing process and the enrollment with the health plans over and over. So not only do you lose time for the providers, the organizations, the hospitals can lose per day. It's estimated that they lose $17,000 for every provider that cannot start seeing patients. So lost revenue, and imagine that also means that patients cannot be seen in a timely manner. So it's a vicious cycle. But definitely, I think solving provider credentialing, provider enrollment, as well as the whole infrastructure, the way we license healthcare providers in the United States, not only credential for privileges in the hospital or with health plans, has to be streamlined. And I've always been an advocate for blockchain, but we have a lot of digital advocacy to do and education to get that to happen. If I could just add one more point, I agree with obviously everything that Heather and Rakesh mentioned totally. I would add only 2 more items in terms of our pain points for our limited time we have, because otherwise I think we can talk 3 months on this topic. But I would say dynamic consent is very important too to consider, because for now, even if we solve it with decentralized identity, that does not mean if you gave consent once today that you want to keep it forever. And you might not want to give consent to everybody for everything that you signed today for a surgery, right? Unfortunately, as we know, we have a lot of work to do on minimizing data disclosure. And I think we're all working collaboratively to find better ways to have a more granular access to various types of healthcare data. I think everybody on this panel usually agrees we work a lot together on various projects, but we don't need to put everything on a blockchain. And then if we decide what to put on a blockchain, what do we need to disclose and to whom, and how do we protect it? That would be the only other thing I would like to mention, that it's a very special interest of mine, right? The privacy, because there, of course, all data in healthcare is important, but there are certain granular levels within healthcare data that most patients might not feel comfortable sharing with even all their healthcare providers. And I think in other venues we shared, right, genetic information is one of them. That's a hot topic. Mental health is another hot topic. So we can go on, but if I had to summarize, yes, I think it's a problem not only between patients, it's not only a problem between organizations, but I would also say it's the whole healthcare ecosystem, payers, right? Claims management organizations, the third parties that we all see as incumbents in the healthcare industry, such as CVS, Walgreens, pharmacy benefit, laboratories that process bloods. I mean, it's a never-endless cycle. So if I had to summarize, consent, longevity, informed data disclosure is another important one, not just blank consent, and then the protection. Thank you.
Well, and you know, that's a perfect segue, because at 31 minutes after the hour, I've got on my notes that we're supposed to start talking about what are the ethical concerns regarding using biometric data for identity, what are the cybersecurity implications, and what policies should be implemented to protect the people. So let's Ingrid, you talked a lot about the types of data that have to be secured from the different sources. Let's talk a little bit about that and the biometric data. Right. What are the ethical concerns that we need to be considering in that?
They're complex, but I think one of the, from a patient perspective, I worry that many do not understand fully what it means. So although you give them what we call informed consent, but is it truly informed? Do they really understand what the consequences can be and the potential misuse of that data? But if you take it from a global good perspective, of course, biometrics data are going to be safer than other things. It's much harder to steal an iris than to steal my phone, right? So there are different layers even within biometrics, and there are pros and cons of which ones. But as we all know, at least iris is the most unique to human, right, individually, even better than fingerprint. So I think if I had to pick the one area from a patient perspective, it's that I worry that they do not truly have informed consent. From an organizational perspective, it's a logistical conundrum to get that done for mass adoption. Although we might all like it, it has its costs. It's very difficult to deploy at large scale, right? And then not to mention the interoperability. Again, it comes up at every topic. How are you going to make sure that every system uses the same standards? How do we make sure that the users have the same inter-system experience, right? And the same type of standardization of security for that type of data. So those are just a few that I think when we talk globally with organizations, they worry, how are they gonna deploy it? And then specifically, if you start to use biometrics, the legal interplay with how you have to harmonize healthcare law and regulations and frameworks with all other rights that a individual has, right, become very complicated. And then last but not least, how do you make sure that you, again, segregate what type of biometrics do you want to use for financial services versus healthcare versus voting and so forth, and how do they interplay? But I want to make sure I leave some time for the other panelists to give their opinion as well.
I think I kind of would like to quickly add on this is, you know, it can make, legally, it can make all interactions non-reputable biometrics. I think that's why law enforcement uses, you know, fingerprint as the evidence, but sometimes that's what we want, but in other cases, it can become a problem, especially when you're kind of dealing with a whistleblower or a political dissident whose anonymity has to be protected. How do we manage that? I think these are some concerns that has to be factored in. What is the adequate level of data that we need to gather? Because basically biometrics is you are giving a piece of yourself away. And if somebody, you know, makes a data leak and then your identity goes into the dark web, how do you prove yourself? I think that becomes a very, you know, it's a non-recoverable situation. So it's almost like, you know, some of these things until now, we are used to seeing only in Tom Cruise movies, but they're slowly creeping into our real life, especially with biometrics. And, you know, this is a reality of doing globally business. It's a great for us. Collaboration is great because the whole world is wide open for our business process, for our data, for technology evolution. With that comes a lot of risk. And are the governments here prepared to deal with this? Regulations always catch us up only after the fact, while we have got GDPR and CCPA, but what kind of global standard we need to have? with this now, United Nations, a recent need that they recognize, it's very important to focus on digital cooperation at this level. As we start more and more working online, enterprises and sharing data and collaborating, we need to have framework for digital cooperation. So that means regulations, some of these regulations cannot be confined to a country anymore. It has to be some kind of a global standard and harmonization that we need to agree. That's just my thought.
Yep.
Boy, I couldn't agree any more strongly with Ingrid and Indira. Adding to this a little bit, I would suggest that we tend, when examining emerging technologies and getting them in the marketplace, we tend to think about, the center of the curve, the normal distribution, average cases of what we're designing for, and we forget that those who are designing, implementing, and governing these systems are accountable for the exception cases, not just the normative cases. And it is the exception cases where terrible harm can occur. And we end up as society making awful decisions about how many people can be harmed before we decide to act or to change or to intervene. Critically, it is important that those considerations happen really now among us, early and often and continuously, as we are in large-scale integrated technology, regulatory, clinical, and scientific discussions that all intersect here. All of the, let's say, the average cases, the typical cases, they sound all pretty reasonable, and they are, and I'm very personally excited about the positive implications of those things. But now imagine that we've built some system that relies on a particular biometric. Let's just say it's gait analysis, to be arbitrary. It doesn't matter. There's many, many biometric modalities, each with their own implications and risks. Now let's imagine that that has been hacked or compromised, or the method of securing that has been compromised. And let's just put aside the fact that we can convince ourselves that some particular modality is totally secure and reliable. That's not a valid perspective to take in something like this. Biometrics tend to be a backdrop, the backstop, the emergency release valve if everything else were to go awry, right? How do we prove that this meat suit is really Heather Flannery? If my identity were stolen, if my information were compromised, if God forbid I were a refugee, any of those kinds of things. Well, biometrics is the final straw. All you have is your body. That's it. If those modalities are compromised, even the emergency backstops, the emergency escape valves of our system and society could fail. And we cannot allow that to happen. And I say we, those of us engaged in all of this work together collaboratively, we have to be responsible for those kinds of endpoints. I would suggest in the blockchain space, generally, not specific to healthcare and life sciences, there's been years of robust and continuous discussion about key management and key recovery and those implications. When thinking about biometrics as a data element, think about them as even more vital and necessary to have the highest possible cybersecurity posture than private keys have. Because these are private keys that unlock much, much more than what we're talking about in the blockchain space generally, and could put our lives at risk. So an important point about biometrics I would love to get out is that there are many modalities of biometrics, and I would propose that we need to think about attestations or confirmation of identity probabilistically, which is really the only way to think about it. And so you're seeking to move the needle to a probability level that is paired with a risk level. So depending on the risk, you want that probability to be either near 100% or perhaps 75% is just fine for this particular case. So a probability curve paired with a risk assessment is the appropriate way to determine where you need to arrive at on that level of certitude about that identity. And then, let's say you need to get to 98%, it's important to think about not individual biometric modalities, but multiple biometric modalities, and I would suggest randomized. Because otherwise you are creating a much easier pathway for potentially nation-state level criminal actors to compromise those systems. So there's a lot more to this. And one last point, and I'll stop, and I agree with those. I get overexcited about all of this. We have to remember that DIDs and SSIDs and verifiable credentials and the biometric systems of verification where applicable, these things are really kind of inseparable. They need to be thought of cohesively as different dimensions and aspects of a future state infrastructure, and not, you know, I worry about splintering off our directions when we think about those things because they're so intensely interdependent. Thank you.
That's great. And Heather, we got a question from LM Bruce that I'd like to throw out to the group. How are we going to ensure that our healthcare data is not used against us, even in a decentralized identity system? Information can be collectively against us. If we remove individual IDs, I'm particularly concerned about corporations where profit is more important than anything else. The users must have the ability to shut off all healthcare access without penalty of freedoms and movements within a decentralized system. So I'm going to let that be the last question that we do, and then we'll go into closing remarks. So any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we all expressed already our concerns about protecting it, but I think there are various answers to this. One, we already had Heather nicely and eloquently illustrate that you have to have those security valves in place, that not everybody has to have access to all types of identities. But I think we can also consider maybe in the future having our own Internet of Medicine that might put another layer of protection. So that's something to think about, if that would be worth it, or if that exposes us to even more focused attacks. But definitely having a designated cybersecurity framework for healthcare, I think, should be considered, because right now it's just a generalized work, and I think we can do a little better job at developing something unique for healthcare and then for specialties within healthcare. And also, just briefly to throw it out there, digital healthcare twins might be a solution as well to help us. And same thing like for fintech, we might have a digital twin for voting, a digital twin for healthcare, a digital twin for fintech, so that we don't have to make everything available. And I'll let other panelists share their thoughts too, because this is a very important topic. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can add quickly, right? One thing I want to say is that I think, at least from the data perspective, and other than, like, you know, people trying to hack the systems, I feel like if you compare, you know, healthcare data to, like, maybe the data that we share our data on, like Facebook, the amount of monetization is not probably, you know, that high. As in, like, the economic engine bit behind the scenes for that data is not the same as the social media data that we share out there. So at least that's one saving grace, right? And the other thing I think, you know, Ingrid mentioned earlier, also about consent, controlled consent, where, you know, it's not a universal consent where you just, you know, right now where we go in and we sign a form consent that we basically just saying, you know what, you as an organization can share my information, whoever you have a BAA with, right? So there is, you know, if we kind of implement this decentralized identity and also try to put in this blockchain consent management systems where we can control and who we share the data with, that might be one thing. Within this and the HIPAA regulations, I think we might be able to control some of it.
You know, it's interesting. GBA is a global organization, and we're in discussions with some folks in China about opening an office there. And so we've had a lot of insights into what China's doing with their blockchain. And I wonder how this conversation would go over in Beijing. So that's great. Well, listen, I would like to thank all of the panelists. I've learned a lot, and I just appreciate this. Mia, can you go ahead and put the presentation back up on the screen? So I do want to let you know that when we get to the end of these slides, we're going to give you a QR code and a link so you can download this presentation. Actually, it's a link to a folder. What I'm going to ask all the panelists to do for both our panelists and the previous panel is, if there's any information you'd like to share with the 100+ folks that have been on this course, bio, video, anything like that, if you get that to me, I'll go ahead and drop it in this folder. So if people want to follow up with you and on any of the topics you just discussed, we want to make We want to give everybody an opportunity to be able to connect with you. GBA is really focused on a couple things, right? It's helping people connect, communicate, and collaborate. So I'm going to give you just a couple resources that you can use. We do have a couple things that you can use if you want to go further down the space. We have the GBA membership directory. I'm going to go through this slide, and then maybe we'll Nia, once I'm done, we'll just go to the website and just hit a couple of links. We have an organizational directory, so you can go to the membership directory. You can type in healthcare, you can type in location, language. A lot of event planners use that link to find speakers for their events. A lot of projects use it to find resources. You can also see where we have chapters. We have about 15,000 people in about 120 chapters around the world. So these are just some of the tools that we put in place to help people connect. Let's hit the next slide. In terms of helping people communicate, we do events like this. Now, we're doing another identity management event. If you go to the GBAglobal.org calendar and hit events, it's going to be in about 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know if Shiv has put it on the calendar yet, but we do have several events coming up on a variety of topics. We've got the United States blockchain and cryptocurrency with members of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus and FDIC. We've got how do you scale blockchain solutions. We're also doing similar events for Europe, Asia. So if you want to find out what's going on in the world or in a particular industry, you can hit that events page. Our next major event, actually, Priya, if you could click on the world-class speakers, and I don't know if you can get to that page. In May of 2021, we're doing what we did actually in January, we had an event at the United States Capitol where we had about 450 speakers. You might just be sharing that. There we go. We've been asked to expand this to the entire week. So in May of 2021, we're going to be bringing blockchain leaders in from around the world. You can just scroll down. We're going to have a couple folks. We'll have Don Tapscott. You can just keep scrolling down. We'll have Don Tapscott, who's just very credible in this space. I think he wrote the first book on enterprise blockchain. We're also going to have, keep scrolling down, Scott Sternetta. Now, Scott Sternetta invented blockchain back in 1991, right? So he and his research partner actually put the first blockchain in place. And Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper references Scott's work in we just lost you, in 3 of the 8 references. So if you can, I just lost the screen. There we go. And then if you just scroll down, we're going to have folks from all over the world, from the Securities and Exchange Commission, from Kazakhstan. What was it? A little slower. So we're going to have the Court of Appeals from Bucharest, Romania, California State Blockchain Association, some government contractors like CGI Federal, Colorado State, Virginia, Croatia, the compliance officer from Crypto.com, the founder of Dash, DC government, European Commission. Keep scrolling down. And this event is free for GBA members. We'll have folks from Florida, from the Game Benefits Corporation. They're doing a lot of really interesting stuff about identity. In fact, Shiv is working with them to put in decentralized lottery systems for charitable organizations. A bunch of folks from GBA, keep scrolling down, and then folks from just all kinds of global, international. We get India, Inter-American Development Bank, Italian Ministry of Economic Development, London Stock Exchange, Malta, Republic of Slovenia. Nina from Slovenia is working on interoperable blockchain, and I think healthcare is one of their use cases where they're essentially deploying a national blockchain. She and I are talking later, actually early next week. Rhode Island, and it's interesting, the legislation in some of these states are creating very positive environments for blockchain projects. Swiss Department, so the Swiss basically equivalent of the State Department. The Texas Blockchain Council are working on a statewide blockchain infrastructure. United Nations, UK, a bunch of the US organizations. So this is going to be, if you want to be able to connect, communicate, and collaborate with a global community, right, I would say come to the event in May. We're going to have events at the US Capitol, at the Library of Congress, at we have a reception at the International Spy Museum, so it's going to be great. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. This is just one of the many things that are available when you go to the site. So, you go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint. Perfect. Okay. We also have a publication. So if you go to the GBA site and there's a search bar, if you just type in identity or you type in healthcare or whatever your interest, you'll find hundreds of member uploaded information. We've got a resource library. We've got videos available on the on our YouTube channel. One of the ways that we help people communicate is we have a capability to send out up to 2 press releases to 2,000 media influencers today. We've got a newsletter that goes out to thousands of people, and thousands of people following us on our GBA LinkedIn page. So this is a great platform if you want to connect and communicate with other folks. And then let's hit the next slide. And to help people collaborate, one of the things that we do that's really important is our working groups. So 2 working groups in particular that I'd like to bring your attention to. Let's go ahead and hit that link, the working groups link. The Identity Management Working Group led by Shiv and MyEarth.Id. And they're doing some incredible work, including we're looking at deploying something called a government business blockchain platform. It's a blockchain infrastructure. Basically, it's a multi-blockchain platform with gateways to any other blockchain that wants to connect. And you can just sort of scroll through as I'm talking. And then this blockchain is essentially a platform for each of the working groups to develop assets and applications on. We're also implementing a token that allows information and assets to move across blockchains and creating different ecosystems, right? So we're doing this in the area of emergency management. We're doing in the area, Anne, who's on with this, is doing the healthcare delivery blockchain platform. And what she's looking to do there is create an ecosystem of blockchain applications that can interoperate, interconnect, and connect all of the stakeholders, which are not only the patients and the providers, but administrative, and when it comes to mental health, which is one of the initial areas of focus, you've got law enforcement, you've got education, social services. So by creating these ecosystems on top of an infrastructure that allows interoperability, we're trying to solve some of the challenges of some of the things that we've been talking about. And all of these different working groups are looking at solving problems like that. In fact, interestingly enough, our land titling working group and our space working group are getting together to do land titling into space. But it's just incredible things. If you're interested in any of these subjects, you can, if you click view group, you can get in there and join those groups. Our voting working group, we were talking about security a little while ago. Philip Andre with Votes is on with us. One of the things that we're trying to tackle right now is in a remote voting capacity, how do you secure the data from the device through the network to the server or the database. So these are just incredible people from all over around the world, and we would really, if you're interested in any of these areas, we would really advise you to connect with some of these world changers. All right, let's go back to this slide. So identity and the healthcare. Okay, and then next slide. So if you want to get this, will take you to a folder, right? Shiv and I have access to that folder. If any of the panelists would like to share any of the information, information about their projects, what they're looking for, how people can connect with them, if I can ask you to get that to us by the end of the day, this link will stay active for forever. But if people want to go and get this presentation or any of the other information in that, we want to make it available. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to, one more thing. Yep, thank you. The Earth.Id has a project called Trailblazers, or a program, and Shiv or somebody from Earth.Id, I can take a stab at it, but I think you can probably give it a little bit more detail. So why don't you do that and then wrap us up?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Gerard. I think that was a great conclusion. And I think we just wanted to very quickly talk about the Trailblazer program, and it's actually focused on university students and young professionals who are interested in understanding the technology and also work with a global organization like Identity and GBA. And it's a very interesting opportunity. So I think if you guys can share it forward, and if you know anybody and if you want to recommend, I think that would be great. It's a very strong opportunity with respect to participating in this. All are quite passionate about, right? And I think that is what I would suggest. Neha, if you want to add anything, because this is your initiative, I think I would let you do that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Shiv. I just like to add, and I think Chirag summed it up really well, is that we need to create awareness. We need people to embrace this emerging technology, and it wouldn't happen unless we reach out to the generation of tomorrow, which is our college and university students. So with that in mind, we launched the Identity Trailblazers program to just, tell people about how decentralized identity management services actually work practically at Identity. And if you have anybody who's looking to, learn about blockchain, learn about decentralized identity, learn from the experts here at Identity, and Debjani is a great expert here at Identity, and she knows a lot about SSI. So this is a great opportunity, and I'd love for you guys to reach out to as many people as you can. Apart from that, thank you so much. We had a great participation. 100 people are still holding on despite after 2 hours, and that is something phenomenal, and something that is really, really humbling for all of us here who have organized the session. Thank you so much, GBA, for all your support. Thank you so much. This wouldn't have been possible without your support. Thank you so much, Dr. Anne, again for waking up early in the morning and just sitting through the whole presentation. Thank you so much. This was such an amazing experience for me. I'm absolutely new to blockchain, but I just had such a wonderful time trying to learn about it and just setting up the panel and the event. And this has just been such a phenomenal event. Thank you so much for our panelists. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Indira. Thank you so much, Rakesh, for stepping in. Thank you so much, Arwen, Lex, Nibjani, everyone here, who joined in and made this panel such a huge success. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for your views on ethics, which is something which is really, really close to my heart, because at the end of the day, we have to live in a world with our ethics in place. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in and for making the event a huge success. We will be uploading the presentation to the Identity YouTube channel, and you can access it later, and we'll also be adding a link to our website. Thank you so much for joining in. Feel free to reach out to all of us on LinkedIn. We live in one world, which is, I think, one of the only good things about COVID is the borderless access that it has given to people across countries. So thank you so much again for your time, and thank you so much for joining in. That's all I have to say. Shiv, do you